All right, for testing purposes, what we're going to do is do the VVT test and sweep at idle. Sometimes your vehicle may not want to run at idle as you sweep the cams. So if it doesn't, sometimes it's best to just hold the idle at a higher RPM. If you're lucky, it will work around idle. Something else to note, depending on your oil pressure and oil viscosity, you're probably going to want to let the engine warm up completely before you start to do the sweep test. And depending on the engine, you may need to bring the RPM up before VVT will work because of oil pressure constraints. All right, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to pop open VVT settings here. And I have this completely functioning. And what we're going to do is basically wipe these settings out and get started. What I'm going to do is I'm going to save these dialog settings before we get started so that I can load them back in once we're done. Okay, step one when we're going to do this test is we need to zero out the minimum and maximum absolute angles for all four cams. What this does is this puts the VVT system into setup mode so that instead of displaying an angle when we're looking at a VVT gauge, this is going to display the absolute angles coming off of the cams. All right, let's go ahead and get the car started and warm it up a little bit. It's a little rowdy. All right, let's go ahead and get started. What we're going to do is go to VVT settings, and I'm going to take and apply VVT 1 to cam 1. And I can see my degrees are 5 with the duty at 0, and I'm going to increase my duty to 100%. When I do this, you'll notice a distinct change to the sound of the engine. It's going to move this cam 50 degrees. So from 5, we should see 55 degrees when we move the cam. Now we have 55 absolute coming from cam 1. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 5 and 55 in for the absolute angles for cam 1. Cam 1 is complete. I'm going to move to cam 3 because cam 3 is my other intake cam. Move this over here so I can see the angles coming off of VVT 3. And I'm going to move from a duty of 0 to 100 on cam 3. And it's currently showing around 9-10 degrees. So when I change this to 100, we should see somewhere around 60. And we see 59, almost 60 degrees here. So I'm going to change this to 9 and 59. And cam 3 is complete. I'm going to move to cam 2. Now, the exhaust cams work backwards of the intake cam. So I'm going to change my duty to 100, and then I'm going to switch to cam 2. All right, now that I'm on cam 2, I'm going to move from a 100 duty to 0 duty because this cam works backwards. And we can see an angle currently on the cam of 72. I'm going to put in a value of 0. And now we get 23. And so I'm going to put in 22 and 72 on that cam. And VVT2 cam is complete. And we're going to do the same for cam 4 now. So we can see cam 4 is currently 75. And when I move to 0 on cam 4, you can see now we're at 25. So I want to put in a value of 25 and 75. And we're done. It's that simple. Now, a couple things to note here. My main cam is in my ignition settings. My main cam is set to rising edge. Now, I chose falling edge for cam 3 so that my absolute angles would match up. Notice how my absolute angles for cam 1 and 3 are about 4 degrees off from one another, and for cam 2 and 4 are a few degrees off from one another. It just makes things match up much easier, and I know that this works because I've already had the car on the dyno for a few days and dialed this in. All right. Now the last thing we want to do is kind of look at these angles coming off the VVTs. And anytime we have a value that's you know, a little high or a little low, we may want to adjust our VVT angles here so that they, you know, become closer to 0. Use your best discretion on this to get those dialed in the way that you'd like them dialed in. All right. Now I am going to reload our dialog settings for VVT parameters. And now we have the VVT parameters I've been working on for the last few days on the dyno, and we're ready to go. All right, guys, now that we've gone over how to set the VVT absolute angles up and how to find them, let's move on to covering the actual VVT settings themselves. There's a few things that I'd like to cover with you just to make sure that you understand the why and to make it easier for you to be successful when you're dialing in your own VVT settings. So one of the big ones is this VVT maximum slew in degrees. The default on this, if we look at the tooltip, says 2 degrees per cam event. On this coyote, I found that 2 degrees per cam event often caused quite a bit of overshoot as we were trying to get to target, and it would also cause oscillation. By reducing the maximum slew, that's how often or how fast it can change per loop event. I was able to get more aggressive with my PID loops and really get accurate dialed in control. And I'll show you what that looks like here in just a moment. And for your benefit, what I'll do is I will zero our PID loop out, and we'll work through and change the settings a few different ways, and we'll see, how each term affects the loop and how to figure out what to adjust first and what needs to be adjusted to get appropriate and proper control of your VVT. Let's go ahead and get this thing fired up and get started. All right, so one of the things I learned as I was dialing this in is that because these are constantly variable VVT valves, when we get to our target VVT angle, the PID loop is going to have to maintain an output to hold the VVT at that angle. And what this means is that if we're at 25 degrees of angle, and we want to increase our VVT angle, we're going to need to move the loop in the positive direction and then back it back down to a hold position. The reason why I am not using a hold duty here in the VVT settings is that when the engine changes temperature and the oil changes viscosity, that hold duty is going to inherently change with oil viscosity and temperature and oil pressure. So what I did is I spent some extra time dialing the PID loop in instead of using the hold duty, and I set some minimum and maximum duties in the software, and these are basically like bumpers, right? I know that if we go below that duty, we're going to drive the valve closed too quickly, and if we go above it, we're going to drive it open too quickly. Or closed. The exhaust cam is the opposite of the intake cam. So these are things that you can sort of figure out from a data log by looking at what is the VVT duty output doing, and you can set your own limits that way. All right, so let's go ahead and zero out these PID loops on the intake cam. And what we'll do is we will pull up our VVT intake table. And you can see I've been filling this table out as I do steady state. And we'll shrink this box just a bit so we can still see the our PID loop. And we'll go ahead and we'll set an angle. I'm going to set an angle of, say, 15 degrees sitting here at idle. Notice our target has changed to 15, but our VVT angle is not doing anything. Why is it not doing anything? The duty's not moving. The duty's not moving because our PID loop is completely zeroed out. When we're tuning a PID loop, you always start with the P term first. The P term works as an immediate change. Your I term is going to be affect your error over time, and your D term, think of that as pumping the brakes. It's a dampening effect. If we're moving too quickly, if your rate is too high, the D term will dampen that and slow our rate of change down some. So the first thing I do is I just slowly start adding proportional gain, and then I watch what is my VVT duty doing. You can see with a proportional gain of 25, we're really not getting any action on the VVT duty. So I'm going to change this. I'm going to bump it up to 50. And we'll see what happens. Notice how we're still not getting any action at all. There we go. Sometimes we have to give it a little kick so it'll start the loop. And now we'll change that duty, and as we change the duty, we're going to watch and see what is the angle doing. Notice how I made a step change in the intake table, and we got a step change on the valve. But you see how we're not on target. We're about 6 degrees off target. I'm targeting 25, but I only have 19 degrees of angle. Why? Because I only have proportional gain. Proportional gain only affects the loop when there's a difference in error. It's proportional gain times the error, it gives you a step. You're never going to get rid of this angle offset with just proportional gain. So this is when we start adding in some I term. It usually doesn't take much I term to get the loop correct. Let's put in 2 and just watch what happens. Notice how the VVT angle is now slowly starting to climb towards our target of 10 degrees. You can see this in the VVT1 duty output. So it's just painstakingly slow moving up to that new target. Let's change our target to 25 and watch what happens. Now we're actually able to get the target. Why? We have our proportional term moving us for that instant change, and we have the I term affecting the error over time. So this is working pretty good, but now what we're going to want to do is try and speed this loop up just a little bit, because lazy VVT doesn't get the job done. Let's move our I term up to something like 15. And let's see how that affects the loop. Not good. You see how the VVT angle's just kind of all over the place? What we call that is integer windup. What that means is that the I term is calculating too quickly, and it's trying to constantly move the PWM value to chase that error. And as soon as we get an oscillation in the error, where the loop's just going to kind of do whatever. Don't get too aggressive with your I term. That's the point here. Dial your P term in, add just enough I to fix your error offset so that you have a quick change in VVT without overshoot. I found a value of 5 works very well for this particular application. We get to target rather quickly. It works out very, very well. Now notice how we're getting just a little bit of overshoot when we change our angle. Notice how it's moving past it by a few degrees. That's really not that big a deal because our RPM is not changing in this scenario. These are instant step changes to the VVT angle. That's not really going to be common in a normally running engine, but this works very well for dialing in your PID loop for your VVT because these immediate step changes are really easy to use to see an overshoot. A little bit of derivative term may help fix that overshoot. And we can see how our overshoot was minimized to about a degree, and then we immediately make it to target. That's how we dial in the PID loops for our cams. If you struggle with this, remember proportional first, integral, then your derivative term. Only use your derivative term if you absolutely have to, and do not get too aggressive with your I term. All right, guys, I hope this helps. All right, guys. What we're gonna do is get the car steady state on the dyno. We're gonna swing the intake and exhaust VVT cams at different RPM points, see what makes the most torque, steady state. And this is going to allow us to not just look at maximum power, it's going to allow us to look at those part throttle conditions as well. And then we'll eventually work our way up and hopefully we'll get some ramp pulls in today. Let's go ahead and get started. So 2700 is where we're going to sweep the VVT cams and see what happens. I'm gonna give it a minute, let the O2s come up. All right, let's get started. getting a little warm here, so I'm going to let this thing cool down. And you get the idea. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to go through, and while we're doing the steady state, we're going to adjust the VVT angle. And what we're looking for is maximum torque output as we adjust the intake and then exhaust angles to find that peak torque output for each RPM and each load point. And when we take the time on a dyno and we really work through those load points one at a time, we can really maximize the output of the engine. And then once we've got the VVT angle optimized, we have to go back through and adjust fuel and then optimize our ignition timing. So I hope this helps. If you'd like me to cover anything else for how to dial in your VVT, just reach out, let us know, and we'll do our best to get that on camera. So.